A top Pentagon pick says Taiwan needs to spend way more on defense, raising questions over how much Taipei can rely on its biggest security backer. Meanwhile, China commits to ramping up its defense spending.
And we're not giving them any money. Your CHIPS Act is a horrible, horrible thing.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants to kill Joe Biden's CHIPS Act just after striking a $100 billion deal with Taiwan's TSMC. Plus,
Taiwan is inaugurating its second largest offshore wind farm, but the industry is facing some serious headwinds.
good evening. Welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Joyce Sin. Taiwan needs to spend 10% of its gross domestic product on defense. That's according to U.S. President Donald Trump's nominee to become a top Pentagon policy advisor. Elbridge Colby made the comment during a grilling by U.S. lawmakers in Washington. Taiwan is already working to spend around 3% of its GDP on defense. So the question is, how much more can it afford? Jaime Ocon reports.
Security in Asia and Taiwan is a growing concern for the United States, which is in the process of confirming its team of defense policymakers. On Tuesday, Elbridge Colby, who was nominated for a leading position in the Pentagon, spoke about his concerns over Taiwan.
I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. It's very important. The core American interest is in denying China regional hegemony. I think actually as a proportion of GDP, it's well below 3%. I agree with President Trump that they should be more like 10%, or at least something in that ballpark, really focused on their defense. So we need to properly incentivize them.
In the past few years, Taiwan has been working to increase its defense spending to arm itself and defend against threats from China, which seeks to take over the country by force if necessary. This includes billions of dollars on air defense systems, fighter jets, and various types of advanced missiles. But many in the U.S. say that Taiwan needs to move faster to address China's growing military threat. In recent months, there's also been growing concern over parts of Taiwan's defense budget being frozen or slashed by the opposition-controlled legislature.
It's disturbing to me that in recent months, the Parliament of Taiwan has moved to cut their defense budget. Are you disturbed by that move in the Taiwanese parliament?
I'm profoundly disturbed, Senator, and I think the question that you're raising is one that I've heard not only Democrats but Republicans raise often in private. Secretary Mattis, who was mentioned earlier, said we can't care more about your defense than you can. So this is where I think I've been trying in my communication and my recommendations for policy vis-a-vis Taiwan to try to induce them in whatever way possible.
But despite these calls for Taiwan to spend 10% of GDP on defense, analysts say that number is a huge challenge. Looking at countries around the world, very few spend more than even 5% of GDP on defense. But given Taiwan's situation, analysts say Taiwan does need to raise the bar.
We've seen Taiwan increase its defense spending year on year under the last president and continuing under President Lai. And this is it's been Herculean efforts to get what looks on paper like small, half percentage points of growth. But in the grand scheme of Taiwan's national budget, those are actually pretty significant changes.
Taiwan's defense ministry told TaiwanPlus that how it spends and allocates its defense budget is based on its own assessments. Taiwan is working to increase its defense spending, with President Lai Ching-te announcing last month that the country would strive to allocate 3% of GDP on defense. The concern now, though, is the trade-off, and if defense really is the top priority compared to other necessary services and sectors in Taiwan.
Does that mean, the government decides to, reduce social services or other spending on healthcare, right? Things that really matter to Taiwan's way of life and the people of Taiwan. I just don't see it being politically viable for Taiwan to have to negotiate that social safety net that the people on Taiwan have come to really love, right?
Under U.S. pressure to boost expenditures, the decision to spend more on defense is one that only Taiwan can make. But given the changing nature of security in Asia, it's faced with a tough choice on how much priority to give to its own security. Andy Shui and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
While Taiwan is being urged to up defense spending, China has announced it'll pump an extra 7% into its military this year. This came during the two sessions, the Chinese government's most important annual meeting. Louise Watt is following the meeting from our newsroom here in Taipei. Louise, how will China spend such a big boost for its military, and does this signal danger ahead for Taiwan?
Well, China has been pumping money into its military modernization program for years. It's actually got 10 more years to go till it expects to be completely finished and have its modernization program completed. So it's going to be pouring the money into developing new missiles, new submarines, new ships, and surveillance technology. But today, at the opening session of China's parliament, Beijing officials also stressed the need for the country to be combat ready. Now, this is, of course, a reference to Taiwan. China has a stated desire to one day take control of Taiwan, and the fact that it mentions being combat ready means that Taiwan can no doubt expect to see more military drills in the waters surrounding it. That said, Beijing did offer a carrot and stick approach. It also talked about the importance of promoting economic and cultural exchanges. So this is the softer side of efforts, if you like, to influence Taiwanese to understand and sympathize with China's way of thinking.
Now, China is reeling after new tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump and mounting geopolitical tensions. Are there any signs of how it's going to handle these challenges?
Well, the target growth rate that China unveiled today is about 5%. That's in line with expectations, but it is being seen as ambitious given all the headwinds that the Chinese economy is facing. Now, in recent years, China has hit its growth targets, but its growth has been driven by exports, and exports are now looking a little more precarious given the US tariffs. Now, Premier Li Qiang, he did today announce some measures to boost support for the Chinese economy, including support for high-tech industries. So Beijing is certainly trying to project confidence in its ability to innovate, but also confidence that it has a stable economy. And it perhaps might be hoping that other countries are looking at it and thinking, as the US places tariffs on even its allies, maybe China is a power they can do business with. But Beijing still needs to stimulate its economy, and that's going to be so much harder with a trade war.
Thanks for that update, Louise. That was Louise Watt live in Taipei. Thailand ignored U.S. and Canadian offers to resettle dozens of Uyghur people, instead sending them back to China to avoid angering Beijing. That's according to sources cited by Reuters. The UN and human rights groups objected to Bangkok's decision to deport 40 of the men last week, warning they could face torture in China. The 48 men had been held in Bangkok for a decade after fleeing China's Xinjiang region and crossing the Thai border without a visa. U.S. President Donald Trump is calling on Congress to scrap the CHIPS Act, a more than $52 billion subsidy program to boost semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S.
And we're not giving them any money. Your CHIPS Act is a horrible, horrible thing. We give hundreds of billions of dollars, and it doesn't mean a thing. They take our money and they don't spend it. You should get rid of the CHIP Act, and whatever's left over, Mr. Speaker, you should use it to reduce debt or any other reason you want to.
Trump's comments come after Taiwanese chip giant TSMC announced a $100 billion investment in its American operations. The company is already set to receive $6.6 billion in subsidies from the CHIPS Act, along with up to $5 billion in low-interest loans to build chip fabs in the state of Arizona. TSMC has declined to comment. Some of TSMC's major customers are praising the firm's massive investment in the United States. NVIDIA, AMD, and Qualcomm have all called it a win for advanced chip manufacturing in the country. Taiwan officials have also weighed in, calling it a good thing, while also stressing the country needs to maintain its overall competitiveness in chips. For more on the deal, earlier I spoke with Washington-based economics and tech analyst Ray Wang. What is your assessment of this deal? And one of the big questions here in Taiwan is how worried should people be about the country losing its competitive advantage in this sector?
TSMC done a good job in negotiating because, from TSMC's perspective, it avoid the tariff. It also help its customers to avoid the tariff. So you are basically doing a deal that avoid the geopolitical threat, while at the same time to satisfy your demand of the customers, right? But I want to be very clear here is that there's no specific timeline for this 3 more fabs and 2 packaging firms and 1 more R&D center. So this gives flexibility for TSMC to sort of kind of manage their financial capital spending moving forward. So it's sort of hard to quantify, how worried people should be. But I think the key question here is so right now, let's forecast 10 years later, it's expected we have more advanced manufacturing in the United States. And that, that indirectly will erode Taiwan's strategic value in the event of Chinese invasion of Taiwan. But the latest deal, I think currently people are speculating because there's a new R&D center will be established in Arizona, right? So people are worried that, so you have a new process now in Taiwan, for example, let's say the A14 or A16, right? It could be deployed at the same time as Taiwan deploy A16 or A14, right? So that's the concern people have, right now, Taiwan don't have that kinds of quote-unquote R&D advantage, moving forward. But we really need to see how TSMC plan all of this.
So it looks like TSMC's additional investment will keep going to Arizona. What do you think about that decision? I mean, it's had a tough go in its first phase of investments there. It's faced delays, labor issues.
Certainly, if you look at the P1, right, the first Arizona plant, it faced a lot of regulatory management, a lot of issues over there. We are very, very aware of that. I do think the fabs that moving forward, it will actually be easier, right? Kind of TSMC, they can start getting familiar with the regulatory process, so that will be easier for them to navigate. And certainly the culture, it will be easier. I think the bigger concern will be the talents. There's also the upside here, because if you have bigger expense, bigger presence of TSMC, right? It gives TSMC opportunity to, I won't say steal, but attract the talents from firms like IBM, firms from Intel, right? Or other material firms like Applied Material, Lam Research, right? That's actually helping TSMC for their R&D or for their broader talents pool.
Another target Taiwan has on its back with Trump is its large trade surplus. Do you think Taiwan's tactic of encouraging more investment to the U.S., now TSMC's $100 billion pledge there, is that enough? But also, when, if ever, will it be enough?
This is a good question. I think, I certainly couldn't give you the answer or make any conclusion on whether this can satisfy Trump. But I certainly think it's a approach that you must take, right? You couldn't just tell Trump hey, we are not going to invest anything. Eventually, what you are going to get is getting tariff, right? So it's very important to show hey, we would love to continue to trade with the United States, but at the same time, we would love to making investment after proper calculations when it comes to the business side. I'm not sure the governments have put enough effort on this, because I certainly feel private sectors is always leading the efforts on this. The Lai administration, the current ruling government, has been very supportive to the expanding investment for Taiwanese companies in the United States. That's fine, but what can we really get back from U.S. governments, right? Whether it's support from military, it's support from diplomatically, or it's support economically. I think we need to be very clear on what we can get back, right? You don't want to just like give a lot of things and without getting back anything.
That was Ray Wong, an analyst of U.S.-China economics and tech competition. A major new offshore wind farm on Taiwan's west coast is now in operation. The 640-megawatt project faced local protests and long delays. As Rick Lowert reports, the country's green energy sector is facing an uphill battle as Taiwan struggles to reach its carbon emission goals.
Just off Taiwan's southwest coast, the country's second-largest offshore wind farm has just come online in Yunlin County, generating clean energy for 600,000 homes. Inaugurated after lengthy delays to much fanfare.
We have made it a goal to reach net zero emission by the year 2050. And offshore wind power generation is a very important plays a very important role. We have encountered many challenges, however, we are able to tackle them one by one.
This 640-megawatt farm of 80 turbines is a rare success story. The seas off Taiwan's west coast have some of the best conditions for wind farms in Asia, with a shallow seabed and strong, steady winds. Over the last decade, dozens of wind farm projects have been planned along this coast, and some have been built. But construction is now flagging. Taiwan's wind farm energy sector is facing serious headwinds, putting Taiwan's green energy goals at risk. Offshore wind farm construction is being hit by a perfect storm of a global downturn in the industry, government restrictions, and local pushback to large green energy projects. In Yunlin, years of protests and litigation by the local fishing community, as well as a fraud suit against protesting fishers by the wind farm manufacturers, delayed construction and sowed discontent.
建设完成的这个时间对当地的居民跟渔民影响最深的地方，就是目前我们在捕捞的时候就会常常遇到我们的一些像网具啊或是船只的受损。
Taiwan's government says more dialogue is needed with local communities to get them on side with green energy. But the clock is ticking. Taiwan is phasing out nuclear energy. The country's last reactor will go offline in 2 months. And green energy, like wind, will need to fill the gap if Taiwan hopes to be carbon neutral by 2050. International wind farm companies say they are keen to build, but that Taiwan government policies can be hard to navigate.
So I think there has to be a thorough look, maybe together in a collaboration with the MOEA, with the industry, and to find out what are we doing with this, because it's slightly a mess. And we have been looking at and are looking at further opportunities to invest in Taiwan.
The government here is moving away from subsidies and incentives, hoping that wind energy can survive in the free market. Now it's an industry suffering serious growing pains. Taiwan, boasting good winds and a strong manufacturing base, had high hopes of leading the region in offshore wind energy. Many here now hoping it's not too late to turn the current trajectory around. Devin Tai and Rick Lowert in Yunlin County for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about Taiwan's offshore wind industry and its green energy goals, Rick Lowert spoke to energy expert Angelica Ong with the Clean Energy Transition Alliance.
How would you describe the current situation for Taiwan's offshore wind energy industry?
Well, I would say the whole situation is pretty stagnant. You have to remember that the wind industry in Taiwan, the offshore wind industry, is basically President Tsai Ing-wen's baby. I think she really bet big on the offshore wind industry, and as a way of weaning Taiwan off nuclear energy. As you probably know, the last reactor is scheduled to close in May. And the solar is somewhat limited in Taiwan because we're such a small island and 70% of it is mountainous. So offshore wind seemed like the bulk source of renewable energy that she could say, will fill the hole that nuclear is leaving behind. Fortunately, it hasn't really worked out like that. Everything's been slower than expected, and it's been much more problems, and it's also been very, very expensive, and the costs are escalating.
Given the problems facing this sector, how realistic do you think Taiwan's green energy goals are?
You know, it's really funny that we have these really ambitious wind energy goals. In general, these really ambitious renewable energy goals. And those goals, they get more ambitious all the time. The goals, ambitions are getting raised year by year. But if you look at our actual emissions going all the way back to 2005, we've just been treading water. It's higher on some years, it's lower on other years, but there hasn't been any consistent downward movement.
Taiwan once saw huge green energy deals by the likes of chip giant TSMC as tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and Apple pledged to have a carbon neutral supply chain. Is this still a driver for green energy in tech hub Taiwan?
A lot of organizations have been quietly dropping their obligations to climate in terms of carbon reduction. A lot of tech companies have been doing that. Even before Donald Trump was elected, by the way, they've been doing it ever since it became obvious that artificial intelligence is going to be way more energy intensive than anybody anticipated. And they also came to the realization, as we all have now, that it's kind of the biggest game in the world when it comes to tech. So let's just say that the seriousness of their commitments is no longer unshakable.
That was energy expert Angelica Ong speaking about Taiwan's offshore wind energy industry. Mexico, Canada, and China are responding to newly imposed U.S. tariffs on their goods. But while all three countries stand to face economic pain, some analysts say U.S. exporters and U.S. consumers will pay a price too. John Van Trieste reports.
Cargo ships approaching Los Angeles may find their wares subject to hefty import duties once they reach port. U.S. President Donald Trump has followed through on a promise to put tariffs on goods from the United States' three biggest trade partners. Canadian and Mexican products now come with a 25% duty, while tariffs on Chinese goods have doubled to 20%. Trump blames all three countries for a deadly fentanyl crisis that swept the U.S., saying Chinese companies supply the drug and Canada and Mexico failed to stop smugglers bringing it into the U.S. Some analysts see this as among the motivators for the tariffs. All three countries are responding. China has fired a warning shot with new tariffs on some U.S. goods of up to 15%. These include targeted tariffs on agricultural products. Rural America is a bastion of Trump support. Still, Beijing's language is so far diplomatic, with suggestions of a way out from a trade war.
美方如果真想解决芬太尼问题，就应该在平等、尊重、互惠的基础上，同中方磋商。解决各自关切。美方如果别有所图，执意打关税战、贸易战或者别的什么战，中方将奉陪到底。
Mexico has also vowed a response, but President Claudia Sheinbaum has kept her rhetoric measured.
Hemos decidido responder con medidas arancelarias y no arancelarias que anunciaré en plaza pública el próximo domingo. No es de ninguna manera o el propósito iniciar una confrontación económica o comercial.
But when announcing a retaliatory 25% tariff on hundreds of billions of U.S. dollars worth of American products, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau used less diplomatic language.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
And in Canada, anger over Trump's tariffs is boiling over, with Canadians rallying around domestic brands and some shops pulling U.S. products from their shelves. Some analysts say the new trade war won't come without a cost to the U.S. itself. U.S. exporters will suffer from retaliatory tariffs and even boycotts like those in Canada. Meanwhile, the extra costs for imports will go to U.S. consumers. And in any case, the global nature of manufacturing means even some partly U.S.-made products will still come with tariffs attached.
U.S., Mexico, and Canada have pretty tightly integrated supply chains. So the average car made in the U.S. or in the Mexico, Canada, U.S. zone tends to travel across borders up to 8 times. And so if you're imposing a tariff of 25% each time a part comes across the border, or if the whole automobile crosses the border, it's going to get pretty costly pretty quickly.
Trump believes the U.S. will emerge from this trade conflict as a winner. But if this kind of analysis is right, all sides may stand to suffer. John Su and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Kyiv is working to repair ties with Washington after U.S. President Donald Trump halted military aid to Ukraine. In a statement on X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his team is ready to work with Trump to achieve peace and to agree to a minerals deal proposed by his administration. He also thanked the U.S. for supporting Ukraine's sovereignty during the Russian invasion and called his public clash with Trump in the Oval Office regrettable. Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally, today we take you to Paris to witness a star-studded gala dinner held at the Louvre Museum. The event is a fundraiser to support the museum's projects and educational programs. I'm Joyce Sin. Have a good evening.